What an unbelievable event. Salesforce is such an incredible organization. Salesforce is one of the few organizations in the world that actually drinks its own champagne. I was actually invited to front an MBA video series on sales just before Christmas. There was a film crew flew in from the UK. We rented a house here in Sydney in Stanmore and we filmed for a week. And they actually asked me to nominate a company we could go and visit that I regarded as best practice in selling. And without hesitation, that organization was Salesforce. So we went and actually filmed the way that they sell. And not only are they a great organization in that they do what they encourage their own customers to do, but they've also got an incredible sales culture and a huge amount of generosity. When Vince Cotti actually asked me to speak to Keynote this year at World Tour again, when he found out that my new book was being launched, Combo Prospecting, that you've all just been given a copy of, Salesforce bought 500 copies of these to give away to you free today. So if you did not get one of these as you walked in, there's additional copies over on my right and your left. Please feel free to get hold of a copy of that when we actually finish the session today. I just really want to open up by talking about the fact that we live in an incredible age of paradox. It's never been easier for people in sales to be successful. Their ability and the tools available to them, for them to research organizations, to identify the right people in those organizations, to find out about what those people care about, to identify a common connection that can provide an introduction, or to research context that gives them a reason to start a conversation. It's never been easier. And yet, especially in B2B selling, everywhere I go in the world, from London to New York, in Asia and Australia, what I find in business-to-business selling, especially the more complex the selling, the higher value the sale, the failure rates are up to 70%. How any organization can regard themselves as successful when that level of failure exists in their own sales force is just beyond me. And we know that there's timeless truths in selling. We know that as sellers, we need to develop relationships of trust with people if we are to be successful. And yet here's the paradox. No new client, nobody that does not know us yet, not one of them is lonely and bored and looking for a new friend. Would you agree with that? They're busy and they're stressed. And if we're going to ask them to give us their time, if we're going to ask them for access to information that we can't discover easily online, if they're going to give us access to their people so we can help them build consensus for change in their organization, in their mind, they're busy and stressed. And the question is, what do I get out of a conversation with you? So there's this incredible paradox that we need relationships to be successful, but nobody that we want to get to is looking for a new relationship. They need value. They need value. And that's the irony of technology today. There's never been more technology to help people become successful, and yet most people feel paralyzed by the amount of technology that's in front of their screen every single day that they go to work. Do you know, when I talk to salespeople and say to them, what's your biggest challenge? The common answer I get is, Tony, do you know what? I know how to sell. The only real problem I've got is I just don't have enough pipeline. And when they say that, I tend to take a step backwards so I'm out of reach so they can't punch me. But I say, do you know what? If you knew how to sell, you would have enough pipeline. The very notion of trying to separate the building of sales pipeline from the creation of sales revenue, I think today is very, very problematic. Everybody in the organization needs to own the responsibility for creating revenue, and everybody in the organization needs to be responsible for creating great customer-centric culture. And I'm going to tell you a true story in a few minutes about what I regard as the greatest example of customer-centric culture, the greatest example of a leader who stepped up and served his clients in Australian corporate history. I'm going to share that story with you. But again, when I talk to salespeople, they'll typically say what you can see in that quote on that slide. They'll tell me that they meet the expectations of their customers when they meet with them. But when you go talk to customers and you make that statement to them, this is typically the reaction. The reality is, 85% of the time, people are actually failing to actually meet expectations. And there's huge consequences for this. If we just think again about technology, our ability to research people, to provide insights for them, to provide value in conversations well in advance of them deriving value by becoming a customer. Do you know, last week I actually caught an Uber to go to a meeting, and I always talk to the Uber drivers and ask them whether they enjoy driving for Uber, what do they do for a normal job. And this particular driver said to me that this is his full-time job. I said, oh, what did you do before this? He said, I used to be an SAP programmer. And I used to work for SAP many years ago, and I said, were you a basis programmer or an ABAP programmer? He said, basis. And I said, what happened? And he says, well, all of the jobs are gone. All of the jobs have been offshored to India. So if it's not technology that can disrupt our very existence, it's offshoring. It's new competitors entering the market. It's never been easier for people to innovate and disrupt traditional strong competitors. And I said to him, this is incredible. It would have only been 10 years ago that you would have been sitting around the dining room table thinking, I make a great living and my income is secure through to retirement. I'm highly skilled in an area where the market really values it. I'm okay. And yet his job's gone away. And I think the reality for sellers, if they're only meeting the expectations of buyers on 15% of the occasions that they meet, I think sellers are in trouble too. If we don't embrace the technologies that will enable us to thrive, to give us leverage, to help us achieve that level of efficiency and effectiveness in selling, we are destined to be replaced by those technologies. That's the simple reality. And the first area that's going to be impacted is that inside sales role, what some people call a sales development rep. So let's actually talk about what the three big problems are. So if you look in business, I really believe that the main problem is that there's sales pipeline atrophy. People have forgotten, or they've deliberately chosen to drink the social selling Kool-Aid, where they've become hyper passive in how they sell. But people have failed to start to build the right level of pipeline that they need to, and there's increasing levels of failure and decreasing levels of loyalty. And when we think about loyalty, it's very important for us to understand that loyalty does not come from satisfaction. Loyalty does not come from customer satisfaction. It's easy for a satisfied customer today to still leave. What creates customer loyalty is emotional connection. Ideally to a relationship, less ideally to the experience that they get, and then less ideally again to the brand. But if we can create emotional connection in the relationship, in the experience that we provide, and to the brand, there are three things that we need to do to really help solve that problem. So they're the three big problems that are going on, but what's really the cause? Because it's easy to confuse symptom with cause. The first thing is there's just a low level of the right level of activity. I remember with one of my clients in the USA, I did some work with their sales team for a few days, and they flew me in a day early just to sit on the sales floor. And the thing that staggered me was I was in their office at about 7:45 in the morning. The first salesperson arrived on the sales floor at about 5 to 9. Most of the others turned up about 9:15. They opened their laptops, they checked email and social platforms, then they went away to go and have breakfast. So this is one of those companies where they've got a beautiful kitchen that caters for all of the staff. The theory being you drive greater levels of productivity for people if they're not outside of the office. But they went and had breakfast, then they come back and they're joking and they're back checking email again. The first phone call I heard made that morning wasn't made until after 10 a.m. in the morning. And yet the best time to call people, the best time to send somebody an email is at about 7:45 in the morning till about 8:45 in the morning. People tend to check their emails on their iPhone while they're traveling. We all do this, right? So we check them while we're traveling. Even if our phone rings on a train and we get a voicemail, we'll go and check who that voicemail is. So the first big thing is that there's just not enough of the right activity. And what I want you to think about today is for your own organization, every single day, people need both oars in the water. They need to be pulling on both oars, the oar of creating sales pipeline and the oar of progressing opportunities. If we're not doing both every day, then what we get is this huge roller coaster ride of performance where we think, oh my goodness, I don't have enough sales pipeline, I'm going to struggle to make my number. And then we typically miss, and then we go like crazy building pipeline. We get just enough to give us a sense of false hope, and then the pipeline activity stops while we try and close. That's a mistake. If you're a sales manager listening to this, We need to manage the input activities that feed into the right sales objectives that then deliver revenue. There is no revenue lever to pull in CRM. Most of what's managed inside CRM systems, most of what's measured and reported on inside CRM systems are not things that can be managed. So really important that we're doing both every day. The other thing that I see that's going on that's really causing problems is there's a lack of context and a lack of trust in the way that we engage. Relationships still matter. And a key takeaway for you today, if you want to write this down or really think about this, is that the fastest path to revenue and the highest probability of a sale comes from trigger events and referrals. When we monitor, especially for role-based trigger events, what we do is we obtain context for running outreach. And as an example of this, a brand new senior person into a role wants to affect change. They've been hired to change things. Someone who's been in the same role for 11 years typically doesn't want change. They just want the status quo. So that's, for example, a trigger event that we could monitor for. And then if we can find a common connection, then that'll start the relationship with a level of trust. It's really, really important that we start the relationship with a level of trust. And then we need to provide value in the conversation in advance of them deriving value from becoming a customer. What I see with a lot of organizations is that they thrash around trying to close deals at the end of a month, a quarter, or a financial year, and they do it desperately, and they try and provide incentives to motivate the other party to buy. All they really do is weaken themselves in the eyes of the customer. They lower the actual price point that the customer knows they'll be able to get if they just keep waiting for the next time that we're desperate. But what we need to do is we need to base close dates based on the customer's time frame, the customer's level of urgency, from the customer's point of view rather than from our own. And if your organization is struggling to close, what I would say to you is it's typically because you're not opening well. If we open the relationship well, if we open with value in the conversation, and we open by helping them engineer their own business case internally to fund the initiative, and if we help them rally consensus inside their own organization so that they can affect change, then closing becomes the natural, logical next step. So, I've talked a lot about the way that we sell, but the thing that's really important, and it's what I've loved about what Salesforce have been talking about today already, is selling is actually not really about us. Selling is actually really all about our customer. I think sellers today, amidst all of the pressure and the busyness and the shrinking deal sizes and the volume of transactions they need to do, the level of rejection they're getting, the way they're struggling to break through, people are projecting their frustration onto the customer. And the truth is that selling has always and will always be about helping another person achieve a far better state of affairs in their personal life and inside their business. That's really what it's about. But their expectations today are changing because they're busy and stressed, because they feel empowered with information. And what you're seeing on screen now are the three key things that buyers today expect of us. And they expect these things before they've ever talked to us, which is a little unfair. But they expect us to truly know them. They expect us to personalize their experience, even at scale. And business-to-business sellers have much to learn from the retail industry, from business to consumer, because they've had to crack that nut quite a while ago. So truly know me, personalize my experience, and I expect you to be a mind reader. I expect you to anticipate my needs. And the power of technology with AI means that we are able to do this today. If we employ the right technology and tools, we can absolutely do those things. So this, to me, is what it takes to really succeed in sales today. And after this, I want to talk about a true case study, an amazing, amazing example. The first thing is everyone in the organization is responsible for sales. I remember talking to Kean McLaughlin just a moment ago, and he quoted somebody else that we both know that said to his organization, either you're in sales or you're supporting someone that's in sales. Sales is incredibly important. Without revenue, all of the other problems in business can be terminal. But if we have the right level of revenue, we can make adjustments. The other thing is that everyone represents the brand, and everyone needs to create emotional connection to what we're doing for others, that we have a sense of mission and purpose. Now, who remembers seeing this image on the news some time ago now? It was back in 2009. This was Miracle on the Hudson. It was a fantastic movie where that aircraft became a glider once it ingested a bunch of geese, and Sullenberger landed beautifully on the Hudson River. It was incredible. But a less known story that I believe reveals a greater feat of airmanship and certainly a greater level of customer service was the following year with QF-32. So QF-32 was captained by Richard de Crespigny, a Qantas pilot, a seasoned veteran, an ex-Air Force pilot, and that's Richard there with Sullenberg. And what happened was QF-32 in 2010 was on a flight from Singapore to Sydney. I really encourage you to read the book. And the flight had just taken off. It was just approaching 6,000 feet. And a few minutes after that event, Alan Joyce was in the back of his Qantas limousine with one of his other senior executives, and that other senior executive was looking at his iPhone, and he turned to Alan and said, "Alan, do you know why our share price is falling through the floor?" Now, the reason their share price was falling through the floor, and Qantas now has just achieved record profits, amazing turnaround. This wasn't the cause of their problems, by the way, it's just the problems in the airline industry. But at that moment in time, what had happened was Qantas wreckage had showered down on a village in Indonesia. And the reason it had happened was one of the Rolls-Royce engines had a small tube that started to leak. And that leaking oil caught fire and caused an explosion, an uncontained explosion, which is incredibly rare in aviation. And I don't know whether you know this, but the Airbus A380 is the most technologically advanced civil aviation aircraft ever, as well as being the biggest, and it's all fly-by-wire. There's 2 wiring looms that pass through the belly of that aircraft, and one of them was severely degraded. The plane lost about 65% of its roll control. It lost its ABS. There were 200 punctures in the fuselage. Richard de Crespigny was later quoted as saying the explosion was like a cluster bomb going off beside the aircraft. Now, because they were only at 6,000 feet, the plane wasn't yet at an altitude where you would get depressurization. Planes are pressurized for between 8,000 and 12,000 feet typically. So there was no depressurization event. Also, incredibly fortunate was there were 185 punctures in the wings. And in big aircraft, the wings are largely filled with fuel tanks. So the fuel tanks were punctured. Most people don't know this, but the fuel tank caught on fire. But the thing that causes explosions is actually vapor, not fuel. You can fill a glass to the brim with petrol and light it very safely. You put half a thimble of petrol in a glass and try and light it, it will explode. So because the fuel tanks were full, even though one of them caught fire, it just blew itself out gently. Avgas is actually kerosene. It's got lower thermal properties. Inside the cockpit was an amazing situation. Not only did they have Richard de Crespigny as captain, he had Matt, his co-pilot, sitting beside him, but they had 3 other people on the flight deck. They had a flight engineer. An A380 is one of the few aircraft that still has a flight engineer on board. But then they had a captain checking out Richard, watching him fly to see whether his license should be pulled. Qantas is the safest airline in the world. Every 6 months, they just watch their pilots fly. Any bad habits, they take them off the flight deck. So there was a checking captain watching Richard, and then there was another checking captain checking the check captain. And I think we all know that too many cooks can spoil the broth, right? So having that many big brains on the flight deck, where a number of them outranked Richard, was a potential problem. But before they had pushed back from the aero bridge back on the ground, Richard turned around to those more senior people than him and said, "Guys, we're not confused about who's in command, are we?" So once that plane pushed back, he was the command pilot, he was in charge. And the 3 of them worked as a team incredibly well. They had endless warnings going off. I'm not going to go into the whole story, but basically, every minute they flew, the plane was becoming increasingly imbalanced because fuel was leaking terribly out of one side of the aircraft. They had no ability to pump or transfer fuel anywhere else. They had to get it back on the ground. Big aircraft are not designed to land full of fuel. That's why they dump fuel if they ever have a problem before they land. So it was coming in fast and heavy, and they had no ABS. They did their calculations, and they thought they had about 100 meters of spare runway, which is not much. They managed to get the plane back on the ground. That's what the wheels and tires looked like. The brakes were all white hot. They managed to get the passengers off the aircraft. Incredible act of teamwork, of skill. But this is the story for us in business. This is really the analogy. When they got the plane back on the ground, Richard, who's up there, who's on left of screen, he went into the passenger area and he stood up on a chair and he said, "Can I just get everyone's attention? When you fly Qantas, you fly with a premium airline, and you have every right to expect a far better level of service. Right now, there's 1,000 Qantas staff mobilised, seeking to get you hotel rooms. We're going to struggle to get your bags off the aircraft. We're going to give you money or vouchers so you can buy toiletries and underwear. But right now, I want you to take out your mobile phone or a pen and a piece of paper, and I'm going to give you my mobile phone number. And if you do not get treated by Qantas the way that you believe you deserve to be treated, I want you to call me." Have a guess how many people called him? Not one person, not one person. But Richard understood that the leader is responsible for the culture in their business, that the behavior of the leader determines what everybody else does. And that's why whenever he flies, he walks the entire cabin. Not to puff himself up and say, look at me, I'm the captain of the aircraft. He does it because he knows that the cabin crew will provide a better level of service if they know that the captain is walking around on the plane. So it was just amazing. They're the 5 gentlemen concerned. So let me just talk about some lessons I think out of all of this. And then I want to get someone up on stage that is a great sales leader that's achieving great things within the sales culture within their business. So this is really the first lesson for me. One of the important takeaways from today is this. We've known for a long time that we need smart people in our business. And we need smart people that are also good with others and that understand their own limitations, what's commonly referred to as emotional quotient. We need people with IQ and EQ if we're going to be successful. But let me tell you how things are changing. We are in the 4th industrial revolution. The world is changing quickly. AI computers are writing their own software code rather than people having to write code now. And the reality is we need technical quotient. Everyone in business, every leader, every salesperson, everyone needs to be good with the technologies that can enable them to thrive. If we fail to embrace and leverage technologies, I believe many of us are doomed to be replaced by them. And that's certainly the case with Richard. When he converted out of Boeing into Airbus on the A380, he's actually a software engineer himself. He used to have a small business where he had a software package he'd written. But he took the time to understand the flight law of Airbus and the A380 so that if anything ever went wrong, it'd be man and machine working together seamlessly to make sure that he delivered the right outcome and he kept his passengers safe. Just to continue the flying theme with Qantas's competitor, Richard Branson believes that sex is the foundation of customer experience. And what he means by that is that if you're to deliver great customer experience, it all begins with delivering exceptional employee experience. We need to treat our employees as our internal customers. And Jeff Bezos from Amazon is legendary for saying, in any meeting we have internally that's impacting staff or customers, we need an empty chair at the table. And we need to imagine that one of those people are in that chair. It's really common for organizations to think if we just throw technology at people, we've given them the tools and it's job done. But my view is it's not just the technologies. We need to think about people, processes, and technology and invest properly in change. So just in the 4 minutes that we've got, let me just talk through what I think really are the key takeaways today. The first thing is we need to create a truly customer-centric culture. From the way we engineer products, to the way that we think about marketing, to the way that we ask our sellers to go and engage. We need to get salespeople back to the true foundations of selling, where they're all about the customer, They're all about the customer achieving a far better state of affairs in their personal life and within their business. They're all about the business case for the customer. They're all about helping the customer achieve consensus inside their own organization where they can be accountable for actually delivering results. And we need to understand that sales leadership comes from the top. Culture is nothing more and nothing less than the behavior of leaders. We're going to have a Q&A session a little later with Daniel Blizzard from Mayer Financial Services. And as a CEO, he sits with his salespeople. He helps go and create sales revenue. He's all about customer success. The other key takeaway for every organization, and this is a great way to get sales and marketing working together finally, is to really think about how do we provide value for potential customers well in advance of them ever actually becoming a customer? How do we find out where they go to learn online? How do we find out about the trigger events that start them down the path that could eventually lead to us? Who is it that they respect, that they seek education from, and understanding the business case and how to manage their risks? And how can we go and become part of that conversation? So if we can focus on providing a level of value, even if it's a huge level of empathy with the challenges they've got, if we struggle to find an insight. And then the other thing is we need to understand that the world is changing dramatically and it's happening quickly. I believe 20 to 30% of the inside sales rep function is going to be gone within 5 years. What's going to happen is there's going to be stacks of technology with outsourced providers, and if the company's big enough, in-house, where it's going to monitor for trigger events. It's going to find context. Once you profile what a dream customer looks like, it's going to warm everything up ready for human interaction. And what's going to happen is a field salesperson is going to have, in essence, their own digital sales assistant that's going to enable them to be far more productive. So this concept of separating the creation of pipeline from managing and progressing opportunities is going to move from a separate, lower cost person doing it to technologies with AI and deep learning and big data all thrown at the issue to actually create leads for people. Incredibly important. I just want to encourage you, all of you have got a copy of Combo Prospecting. There's additional copies over to my right, but this talks about how we solve this number one problem in business. If we had more sales pipeline, then people wouldn't be as desperate in the way that they sought to pursue business. If they had lots of healthy pipeline, they'd be closing as a logical next step with customers rather than trying to do unnatural acts. So the number one problem is to create enough sales pipeline with the right profile of customers that we're working in partnership with people. Thanks so much for listening, and thank you to Salesforce for putting on an incredible event. Thank you.